Hello, I'm Deborah Riley Draper. I'm a writer, director, filmmaker, producer, and author. I had the great pleasure of bringing a story to life that had been buried for almost 80 years. My documentary film is called Olympic Pride, American Prejudice, and I also authored a book by the same name after the film came out. The story came to me in an interesting way. For my entire life, I thought Jesse Owens was the only African American man to actually participate in the 1936 Olympics. And I would discover later, much later after my junior high track career, that there were 18 African American men and women who defied Hitler and Jim Crow to win hearts and medals at the 1936 Olympics. And I was astonished by this fact. I thought, wow, these inspiring, patriotic, athletic, incredibly smart heroes are overlooked. This is a story that should be told. This is a story that everyone should know about. It's important to American history, to world history, to sports history. So I decided, why not? I'm going to make a film about it. And I spent the next 4 years researching the story, learning about each of these athletes, which included Mack Robinson, who was Jackie Robinson's older brother. And so, interestingly enough, Mack Robinson would always tell this story that his younger brother, Jackie, faced incredible discrimination when he was integrating Major League Baseball. And Mac would always tell his little brother Jackie, well, you face discrimination in the US. I faced Hitler and still won a silver medal. And I thought, wow, these are incredible stories. And these are people we don't know. We didn't even know, or at least I didn't. I didn't even know Jackie Robinson had an older brother who was a world-class sprinter who had competed for the United States of America in 1936 in Berlin, Germany, in front of Hitler. That in itself is a remarkable feat, but to win a medal under those types of conditions is extraordinary. And to learn that not only did Mac Robinson do it, but so many other African American athletes did it, but their stories were lost. Their accomplishments intentionally or unintentionally suppressed and marginalized. So I wanted to amplify their stories. I wanted to put them on the sports pedestal that they belonged on. Um, I went to Berlin, Germany, and I researched at all of the archives in Berlin, at the University of Cologne. I did interviews with German citizens who were literally at the 1936 Olympics. One young woman who had been in the opening ceremonies, and two young men who had purchased tickets with their very little savings to participate and see this incredible spectacle that was the 1936 Olympics, because that Olympics in itself was a bit of propaganda. And that Olympics had so many firsts. It was the first televised Olympic Games. So it was pretty incredible. And if you know your Olympic history, you know Leni Riefenstahl made a film called Olympia about the 1936 Olympics, and her producer was Hitler. She had 22 cameras on the ground in the Olympic Stadium, and many of the techniques that Leni Riefenstahl used in 1936, sports photographers, journalists, filmmakers, and uh, documentarians still use that to this day. That's how prolific her filmmaking was in 1936. So I'm uncovering all of this information in addition to the fact that in 1936, America was on the fence as to whether or not to even participate in the 1936 Olympic Games. The country was divided. There was information coming through about the persecution of Jewish people in Germany and around the world. And so the country had to make a decision. Is this going to be the games we're going to support, or will this be the games we will boycott? And this argument went on and on. The president, FDR, did not get involved, even though he was the honorary chairman of the Olympic Committee. He left it to the AAU. And on one day, December 1935, the AAU had to make a decision and vote. and they voted and they decided against the boycotts of a lot of people that they would take a team of Americans, and it would be 400 Americans, 18 of whom were African American, to Berlin, Germany to compete. And with all of the political, cultural, social, racial, and economic themes within this story, I knew it would be a prolific sports documentary and a documentary that would tug at people's hearts because at every juncture of this story, there was a hurdle. The first one was, can the team even go? And you're talking to these young athletes who are 17 and 18 years old, and they've been training for the past 3.5 years. And if you don't go, their hearts are broken. But if you take them and something happens to them, then you're responsible for the trauma these athletes could potentially discover or be involved in. So that was the first hurdle. They go. The second hurdle is they don't have enough money as an American team, and the African American athletes in particular, because in that time period, you have to raise your own money to be able to participate. So these athletes had to raise enough money to be able to afford to get on the boat that was headed to Germany. And that was a challenge, which they overcame through people gave them money, they fundraised, different coaches supported them, different patrons supported them. So there they are. And when I interviewed the families of some of these athletes, they all had great concern about sending two of the athletes in particular, Tidye Pickett and Louise Stokes, who I had never heard of. But these are the first two Black women in history to represent the United States internationally. So these were two women who could not vote, they couldn't own property, they couldn't have a credit card, and they wore USA on their back proudly, representing a country in which they were regarded as second class citizens. And they did it with great dignity and great pride and great athletic ability. And I thought, wow, that level of courage needs to be recognized. And we need to see that on screen and be reminded. And also for some people, reminded and reinforced that America looks differently across all of our country. There are different people, weight, shape, sizes, race, color, creed, religions that make up our incredible country and that make up our team. So I decided I would focus on these two women and the other 16 men and tell the stories of not only their lives as athletes, but the lives that actually drove them to become athletes and the circumstances that shaped their ability to have the wherewithal to hop on a boat in 1936. And African Americans and ships don't have the best track record, and hop on this ship and go to Germany. So, what was also quite interesting in unearthing these athletes were they were incredible. Archie Williams, who won gold in the 400 meters, was at Berkeley. He was a mechanical engineer, which there were very few African American sprinters who were mechanical engineers at Berkeley. And he was also a pilot. He would become, after winning that gold medal at the 1936 Olympics, a Tuskegee Airman. Each of them did remarkable things on the field and off the field. Ralph Metcalf, who would win both a gold and a silver at the 1936 Olympics, would become a U.S. congressman from Illinois. And he would be the founder of the Congressional Black Caucus and the author of the Black History Month resolution bill that would make February Black History Month. So these were quite ambitious, quite curious young people who, through the next decades of their lives, would have fundamental impact and foundational impact, not just in sports, but across many genres. So that's why I thought this was important. I also thought it was important because in their diaries and in their interviews, they also mentioned the fact that their experience in Nazi Germany was in many cases better than their experiences in America, in terms of they didn't have to sit at the back of the bus. They can go in any restaurant they wanted. They lived in the Olympic Village without segregation, which they had experienced on the boat ride over. They were sequestered to the bottom of the ship with the American team as they sailed over. So there was this dichotomy and there was this veil of equality or integration that they experienced. And for a fleeting moment, it was something that they understood to feel like freedom, although they knew it was propaganda. So it's extraordinary as a young person to have to unpack and reconcile all of these different emotions and all of these different themes and all of these political actions in which they are right smack in the middle of. So these are coming of age stories that are extraordinary. Yes, they did great accomplishments on the field. They brought back more medals than any other contingent or cohort of athletes on the U.S. team. But they grew as people. They began to understand sports as diplomacy. They began to understand the power that they had, and they would all come back to be very ardent activists for equity and equality and inclusion and belonging. Um, Even that early, this work that they did was the precursor of the civil rights. It's the precursor of being able to see integration in the NCAA, the NBA, and the NFL. So they did a lot of heavy lifting back in 1936. And with all of this research I did from California to New York to Berlin, it was too much for an 88-minute documentary, which is how I came to writing the 400-page book, because I wanted to dive more deeply into the lives of these athletes and also more deeply into the setting. And that's why in the book you see Berlin and Germany versus the United States at that same time period so we can understand what's happening and you have a little bit more contextual relevance in the book to understand how remarkable of a feat it would be to be one of these 18 people in the early 30s to have already been in college, and in one case with Ralph Metcalf, graduate school. The odds and the obstacles you have to overcome to at least get to that level, and then the wherewithal to be able to compete at that level. I interviewed NBA great Isaiah Thomas, who had been on the 1980 Olympic team, which did, in fact, participate in the boycott. So he never actually got to participate in the games. And he recounted that if he were Tidye Pickett or Louise Stokes' parent in 1936, he would have never let his daughter go alone on a boat to Nazi Germany. But these young women did. They traveled alone without a coach, without a chaperone. And that in itself is so fearless and so incredibly courageous. And that level of courage, I think, is something everyone can tap into. And that's a lesson that everyone can learn, that when you're committed to doing something, that there will be obstacles and there will be people who will stand in your way, and you have to find a way to fight through that. And that's what they exemplify. So in that book, we learn about where they're from, how they got to these different places. And it's a lot of stories, 18, in fact, coming of age stories in one book, wrapped around one of the most notorious sporting events in history, the Berlin Summer Olympic Games in Nazi Germany, where Hitler did not recognize the participation of Jewish athletes and or African American athletes. In fact, the two Jewish athletes on the track team in 1936 were benched because they were Jewish in Berlin. They were supposed to race in the relay, and just minutes before they were to take the field in political maneuvering, they were replaced. Heartbreaking for these young men who had traveled on this boat all the way to Germany and who were best in class athletes to not be able to show the world what they were capable of. And the same thing happened to Louise Stokes as well. So these are stories of triumph with the gold medals won by Jesse Owens and Archie, but they were also stories of broken heart when the women and the Jewish athletes were marginalized simply because of gender or because of being Jewish. So I think these are great stories for us to learn about and great experiences for us to tap into and for us to apply in contemporary life. I think what these athletes experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly, are things we have to unpack so that in 2025 we can be better as our fellow citizens, we can be better as neighbors, we can be better as people, we can ensure that our countries around the world are thoughtful and caring and benevolent to all. I think the thing about humankind and the thing that they learned in 36 is that you need to be human and you need to be kind. That's the whole point of humankind. And if there's no kindness in your actions, then you need to recalibrate yourself. Um, and what they learned was so powerful that they would spend the next decades of their life being dedicated to helping others, being dedicated to lifting people up. So those experiences, some of which were traumatic, um, actually they were able to reframe as the fuel to be better people and to help people. So Olympic Pride, American Prejudice speaks to just that, the pride of these athletes, the prejudice they face, the propaganda they were a part of. And I had so much research, pages upon pages upon pages upon pages of research, that I was able to author this book with Simon and Schuster, and I had a co-writer, which was great. Blair Underwood was the incredible voice and the narrator of the documentary, and he was also a consultant on the book as well. So it is a labor of love to be able to write anything that has that many pages in it, but it's also a labor of love to be able to dissect a period of our history and give a perspective and a point of view that's never been told before, that's not been recognized or amplified. So I thought that was great. And one extraordinary moment for the film and the book occurred after the 2016 Olympic Games, and Team USA got to go to the White House. And I petitioned for the families of the 1936 Olympians to go to the White House too, because 80 years prior, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as president, did not invite the Black athletes to the White House. So 80 years later, their families would be able to go to the White House and be recognized along with Team USA and receive an apology for that incredible 80-year snub. And I think as a writer and a director and a filmmaker, that is my greatest gift, to be able to ensure that their accomplishments were recognized with those 2016 athletes and ensure that their families understood the power uh, and the importance that their fathers, husbands, and grandfathers, in some cases, had achieved, because all the athletes had passed away. So their families represented them in that moment. So I think as creators, it's our job to find these stories that are important. It's our job to tell these stories. It's our job to amplify these seminal moments in history that we don't know about, that we didn't learn in the classroom, that no one actually shared with us growing up, and to understand better the society we live in by unpacking the past. You can't really have a great future unless you understand what happened in the past. So that's why I loved telling this story. Thank you.